Today's Thursday, February 18th, and part of my slight delay here, we had a beautiful minyan outdoors this morning in our brand new pavilion, and I have a new computer because my old computer simply died. I think too many live broadcasts took its life, and I think we had maybe 500 videos that we posted during this pandemic, live videos. So this is a new computer. I needed all the new passwords and login information. So now I'm finally in, and I'm hoping that everything is running smoothly on this new computer platform. So good morning. Today was Thursday. We're learning the Kosher crash course. We're learning lesson number 5 in our Kosher crash course, as we take on the very formidable subject of kosher in Jewish law in our crash course. We are going through the 33 items that you need to know about, who the main characters are when it comes to kosher law, so that we can find our bearings and know the proper context of where we're coming from, where we're going, and what we're dealing with. We've already covered probably 24 titles in the kosher crash course main characters. We're nearing the end of the main list, and now we're going forward with the next concept, basic fundamental concept in Torah, in the laws of kosher. Today's Torah study has been generously sponsored by Corina Nadel, Karina Bas Teva Kela, in honor of her successful surgery today and her complete and speedy recovery. Corey, we wish you much success and blessing today. May it go well and may you be successful. Good morning to you, Winston from Indonesia. You say that the sound is loud and clear. I'm glad to hear that the voice of Torah rings clear in Jakarta right now, live. It's amazing. And welcome to Ed Hockman, Andy, Zolzain Mid Mazel, and Marinov. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me this morning. Let's go right into it. Today's first up, is the concept of salt, which plays such a major role during a snowstorm. It also plays a major role when it comes to kosher, and all for the same reason. The reason why we use salt when it comes to snow is because the snow is melted by the salt. But why? Salt melts snow because salt has the peculiar quality of being able to draw the liquid out of something. So just like when you want to melt something, you cover it in liquid. So too, when you draw the liquid out of the snow, it melts the snow. When we salt meat, we remove the treif component of the meat, and that is the blood. Now, we're not talking about a treif animal, because in the case of a non-kosher animal, the whole animal's treif. Whether it's a carcass, whether like roadkill, whether it's a treif animal, we discussed this recently, which is an animal that is going to die. It's got a fatal illness, and that's considered the legal wording of treif. Or whether it was slaughtered improperly, or whether it's, then it's for sure treif. But even if we talk about a kosher animal, which was slaughtered properly, you now have a kosher steak, but you still can't eat it because you need to remove the blood from the meat. How do you separate the blood from the meat? This is why we have the concept of salting meat. It says in the Torah, this is the origin of this concept in kosher. It says in the Torah in Leviticus chapter 7, verse 26, V'chol dam lo tochlu, v'chol mashvatichem la'ofel habeimah. And all blood you shall not eat in all of your dwellings, for both for poultry as well as for animals. Therefore, someone who wants to eat the meat of an animal or a bird that was properly slaughtered has to do what he needs to do in order to remove the blood inside of the meat. And this is what happens when you salt the meat after the proper slaughter. Now, there's a whole process to the salting of the meat. My father actually is a sheichet amongst his many other talents. He's a slaughterer, and therefore he would often come home with literally bags of meat that were straight out of the abattoir, and we would salt them in at home in our backyard. So we would see this process. Normally we don't really get to see this today unless you're a butcher or you're some sort of a supermarket. So the process of salting the meat, which again we don't really do today, but just to know what it is I mean, we don't do it on a private level. We do it normally. By the time you have the meat delivered to you, it's already salted, and because it's got a kosher label on it. I see Andy, who's an engineer by trade, says that salt works by lowering the freezing point of water. Very interesting. I don't really understand what that means, Andy. Salt lowers the freezing point of water. Is that what it does? I don't really understand how that works, and why would that have an effect on the blood of the meat? Right? There's no freezing involved in the meat. I can tell you that in the context of Jewish law, again, it's not physics or chemistry, but within the Jewish law, the way it's described is that it's poilet. It causes the evacuation of the blood. So here goes. The stages of salting are as follows. First of all, you need to clean the parts of the animal that you're going to salt. You got to clean them very well with water. Then you need to soak them in water for half an hour. After that, you have to leave them on a web, like a rack. You kind of leave them on a rack or inside of a pot which has holes at the bottom so that it will drain. The idea is to drain. So first is cleansing, then rinsing, then draining, and then you salt them with mid-sized salt very, very well on all sides, so that there's no spot which is not covered in salt for the duration of 1 hour. After the salting, you shake off the salt from the meat, or you wash it in water in order to remove the salt, and you wash it well in a clean dish which is filled with water. Then you pour out the water, and you fill up the pot again, and you wash it out 3 times. The concept is rinsing it out 3 times. This process of salting the meat helps to kosher the various parts of the animal. But when it comes to the heart and the liver, which are very much filled with blood, the liver we know is where the blood is, I think it's produced, and the heart is obviously where the blood is pumped. So there, in those limbs, the heart and the liver, they need a more complex, a more intense process of removing the blood. It's not enough to merely salt them. There's another process that you need to do, which we'll discuss later. So therefore, in conclusion, what we're talking about right now is the process of removing the blood from the meat in the process of salting. Now, an interesting question that comes up in Jewish law is, how do you know that when you're salting the meat, if the meat transfers the liquid from one place to another, then how do you know that you're removing from the meat? How do you know that you're not infusing the blood into the meat, right? So the Talmud gives a very interesting answer. It says the words of the Talmud in Aramaic is that since it's busy with evacuating the flavor, evacuating the blood from the meat, therefore it is not capable of absorbing the blood into the meat. And that's a very powerful lesson when it comes to something that we spoke about yesterday in yesterday's Torah class, which is a Talmud class, about being influenced by your environment. We actually spoke specifically about shielding our children from negative influences. And we spoke also about Chabad, that does not live a sequestered and insulated bubble style life, where Chabadniks go out into the middle of nowhere, into a spiritual desert, in order to inspire their surroundings over there. So I was inspired by this concept of the salt in a spiritual sense as follows: that just like the salt can either absorb the blood into the meat or evacuate the blood from the meat, it cannot do both simultaneously. So too, when it comes to influencing your environment or being influenced by your environment, you will be influenced by your environment, as we discussed yesterday, unless you are so busy influencing your environment that you have no time to be able to be influenced by your environment. Just like the salt, they can either absorb or evacuate the blood from the meat or into the meat, not simultaneous. So too, when it comes to us being influenced by our environment, by our surroundings, if you are a shaliach, if you're an emissary of the Rebbe, if you're a leader in your community, if you are someone that inspires your environment, then you don't have time to be influenced from them. But if you are minding your own business and you're not influencing your environment, then you are certainly susceptible to being influenced by them. Okay, so that was just an interesting concept that came to me right now in connection to what we studied yesterday, to what we discussed yesterday in our very animated Torah discussion. Let me check the comments coming in. Terry from Atlanta, nice to see you. Andy, reblood, that's a different story. Salt draws out moisture through the process of osmosis. Osmosis, something I learned in high school physics, been a while. So listen, Andy, I'm going to defer to you on all the chemistry stuff here, okay? Let's try to see how we can make it work. I'm not going to argue with you. Marty, Andy, it's so good to have your expertise in our class. Of course, miss our time together. So different process is saying, says Andy, for snow and ice melting versus koshering the meat. Look, exactly how it works, I don't know. But what we do know is that the salt does remove the blood. How it works, I'll leave it to you. Miss you too, Marty. Tov Miriam from New York. Elaine likes the analogy. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. You know what's interesting is that, no, that's fine. Okay. I guess something interesting about YouTube, it doesn't tell me when the comments came in. But on Facebook, it does tell me when the comments came in, so I can at least get some context. When you post Elaine, beautiful analogy on YouTube, it's hard for me to know if it's something recent or a little while back. But at least on Facebook, I'm able to tell when they came in. Winston, is it hard to find? If it's hard to find kosher meat, I guess like in Jakarta, Indonesia, where you are, is it okay to be vegan? The answer is certainly yes. It's much better to be vegan than to eat non-kosher meat, than to eat treifa meat. Obviously, this law only applies to Jewish people. But being vegan would mean that you don't eat meat that you're not allowed to eat. I remember growing up for the first 7 years of my life in a town called Springs, South Africa, which is about 45 minutes drive from Johannesburg. There was no kosher milk. So my father just didn't drink milk. That's what he did for like 7 years. He just didn't drink milk. Good morning, Rob. I hope you tuned in. I'm not sure when you tuned in, but I hope that you were able to hear the answer to your question yesterday. I just mentioned moments ago an analogy. If you rewind the video a little bit, Rob, in case you missed it, spoke about the reason why you're able to influence your environment, like Chabad, where we live in spiritual deserts, and how we're able to raise children that are Torah true Jews instead of being influenced by their environment. It was an idea that we just discussed to the point that you raised yesterday, Rob. I hope you find that answer meaningful and relevant and inspirational. Let's keep on going to the next concept in our kosher crash course. It's a crash course, right? The next one is one that is not so practical today because we're living in days of exile when the temple is not built. The temple is destroyed in Jerusalem. But this is the one about the gifts that we give to the Kohanim, to the priests. There are certain gifts that we have to donate to the priests before we're able to enjoy the parts of the animal that we're allowed to eat, the parts of the food that we're allowed to eat. And they're as follows. So the verse in the Torah is in Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, chapter 18, verse 13, where it says, "And this will be the law of the priests from the people, from those who offer sacrifices, whether it's an ox or a lamb, they shall give to the Kohen, the priest, the zroa, the lechayayim, and the keva." This is the arm, the cheeks, and the keva. I'm pretty sure the keva is the intestine. So they give the intestine, the cheek, and the arm has to be donated to the priest. The person who slaughters a kosher animal, this obviously only applies to kosher animals, the Torah commands him to first give to the priest the right arm, only the right arm, the cheeks, both of them, including the tongue, as well as the intestines. This law applies also today, however. Today what happens is that that instead of actually donating these animal parts to the priest and like delivering them to his door, imagine he's getting animal parts via Amazon Prime Now delivery. I mean, it wouldn't be very much appreciated. But today, the way we do it is that the owner of the animal makes a deal with the priest that he will actually purchase from him these gifts, and then they're allowed to be eaten by everybody else. So the butcher, the farmer, will make a deal with the Kohen to literally pay him off for these biblical gifts, and he literally buys them from him. So instead of making the transfer of, like, in an agrarian society and culture, you're able to literally, you're on the farm, you tell the Kohen, come to my house later, and you're going to walk home with dinner for the next 2 weeks. You literally say, listen, I'm gonna wire some money into your account. You'll have the the biblical cheek, the right cheeks and tongue, the right arm and the intestines, and I'll just send you the value, and we'll be able to sell to the Jewish customers all the rest of the animal. This gift to the Kohen is one of the 24 priestly gifts which are biblically mandated to be given to the Kohen. Some of them apply only during the temple times, and some of them apply also today. So we don't really know them so well, because they're primarily in biblical times, and even those that are relevant to today are dealt with already on a level within, at a very early stage of the slaughtering. So that's why, if you have a goat at home, and you want to slaughter the goat, then you'd probably have to deal with it with a Kohen. I'm not very intimately familiar with how that works, because maybe 50 or 100 years ago, a rabbi needed to know how to kosher animals. He needed to know if the chicken was kosher. He needed to be some sort of a zoologist to be able to identify fatal illnesses within the animal or non-fatal illnesses within the animal. So that's the kind of stuff that you'd have to deal with your rabbi. My father would actually deal with this in South Africa. He would literally go to someone's house Erev Yom Kippur and slaughter the chickens for kaparis, for the shlogging kaparis, for the various customs that the Sephardic family would do, and I'm sure they dealt with these priestly gifts along the way. Rob says he was late because he davened this morning in person under the shul's beautiful new pergola. I invite everyone to join us every weekday outdoors, and you will rewind today's Torah study. Good. I hope you find a good answer to your question there, Rob, for a very good question you asked yesterday. Boker Tov Rav, in Mickey, since the pandemic, you started speaking Hebrew. It's unbelievable. I'm super impressed. Amazing. Keep it up, Mick. Rob. So Rob is making a very important announcement that we have built a beautiful new pavilion at the back of the shul, and it is comfortable, it's beautiful, it's outdoors, and it's safe. So we are starting daily morning outdoor minyans. We've had them all through the pandemic, but they're moving outdoors daily starting this Monday at 7:30 a.m. and we have pretty much a minyan committed to coming to the daily minyan Mondays through Fridays, 7:30 a.m. You'll be done by 8 or 8:15, and therefore we hope that you'll join us in the morning for the safe transition to begin your day with. Okay, let's keep on going. The next item on our kosher concept list is the concept of carcass. We did address this. We did mention this in association with the concept of treif. Treif was the animal that is going to die. It's got a fatal illness that's going to die within 12 months, and that is the true definition of the word treif. It's basically a living dead person is a treifa person, or a living dead animal. It's like a zombie. Someone that's going to die is considered already dead, or at least legally speaking. And therefore, if you kill that person, by the way, if you kill a person who is going to die within 12 months, you're technically not liable to murder, because you've killed a treifa person. You've killed someone that's already going to die. This is not a permission to pull the plug on anybody, God forbid, but there is something to understand over here. This idea that if somebody's going to die within the next 12 months, an animal or a person, then they're considered treif. Now, hand in hand with that concept comes the concept of nevela, which is the carcass. The carcass is roadkill. These are the two most common mascots or manifestations or representations of the non-kosher animals. Nevelas and treifas. When you speak in Yiddish slang, you speak about someone that doesn't keep Torah mitzvahs, or maybe a non-Jew, you'll say they eat nevelas and treifas, which means they eat carcasses and sick animals. It's just basically a colloquialism to describe not eating kosher, right? Or let's say the caterer was serving nevelas and treifas. It means carcasses and dying animals. So the source for this in Torah is in Deuteronomy 14:21, where it says, "You shall not eat any carcass, not the convert within your gates." Sorry, to the convert in your gates, you shall give it to them so that they shall eat it. This is not talking about the proper Jewish convert. It's talking about the resident convert, what's called a ger toshav in the land of Israel. a concept that we don't really have today. It's like a very, very partial convert who accepted not to worship idols, but he's not really a full-fledged Jew. So that person is allowed to eat the carcasses, or you shall sell it to a Gentile, because of course the Gentiles are allowed to eat carcasses, dead animals, roadkill, because you are a holy nation unto Hashem your God. This is the origin of the commandment. Thus, carcass means an animal that died or was not properly slaughtered, so therefore it's now dead, but it wasn't slaughtered in a way that's kosher, and the Torah forbid to eat it, even if you are allowed to benefit from it. So you're allowed to sell it, make money from it, you're allowed to benefit from it, as opposed to other concepts in Jewish law where you're not allowed to benefit from. For example, meat and milk. We said when you mix meat and milk, you're not allowed to eat them, you're not allowed to cook them, and you're not allowed to even benefit from them. So you're not allowed to technically own a business that sells meat and milk together. Right? McDonald's shouldn't be a company that you own, because they make money off of meat and milk, right? And therefore, that's something you're not allowed to benefit from. So in this case, you are allowed to benefit from the carcasses. You're just not allowed to benefit. There's other parts in Jewish law that you cannot benefit from. Another example we spoke about recently was chametz on Pesach. We're coming close to Pesach right now, and I want to remind everybody that you should and must sell your chametz before Pesach, so that you don't own the chametz. Your chametz will be owned by a Gentile, because when you sell it to me, to the rabbi, I in turn sell it to a Gentile before Pesach. So that way, all of the chametz in our possession is not owned by a Jew, it's owned by a Gentile during this period of Passover. So that after Passover, the Gentile will hopefully sell it back to us, and we will now resume ownership of our chametz. So to do that, by the way, you can sell your chametz right now online at jewishgardens.com/set me free. That's jewishgardens.com/set me free, where you can fill out the form and sell your chametz. But if you didn't do that, if you didn't sell your chametz and your chametz was owned by you on Pesach, then that chametz is forever banned. You never ever allowed to eat it. You're never allowed to even have benefit from it, and therefore you can't sell it and make money off of it. You literally have to pour it down the drain. I recall the story of somebody who brought me a beautiful bottle of a single, not single malt, but it was a very expensive bottle of whiskey to my house for the Pesach Seder, and it's pure chametz. So he wasn't allowed to own it. I wasn't allowed to take possession of it. So what I literally did is that a non-Jew in my house took it, and under instruction, she poured it into the lake. So there was nothing else we could do about it. We weren't allowed to own it. So that was the story of chametz owned on Pesach. You're not allowed to benefit from it. So the lake in front of my house has a single malt or whatever whiskey in it. Okay. Hope the neighbors didn't notice. So nikur, the next one is nikur, which is traegering. Next concept in Jewish law is the concept of traegering. After you slaughter an animal or an animal, and you check that didn't have a fatal illness, now you need to remove the parts of the animal that are prohibited before you salt the meat. Right? Salting the meat is when you have a kosher piece of meat. You need to make sure that it doesn't have the salt, that doesn't have the blood. That's like the final stage. But before you can even identify that you have kosher meat in your kosher animal, which was properly slaughtered, you need to remove the parts of the animal that aren't kosher. What does that mean? Separating the concept. We spoke about the concept of non-kosher fats. I forget, there was a name somebody posted here in the group what the name of the non-kosher fats on the animal are. It was like a French term, salé or something. I forget what it was called. But you have to traber the animal, which means to remove the non-kosher components of this kosher animal. You also have to remove another part of the animal, which is not kosher. We discussed this in our list so far, and hopefully you're becoming more and more familiar with the concept of kosher, the kosher concept, the 33 main concepts of kosher, and that was the concept of the sciatic nerve. You're not allowed to eat the sciatic nerve, not in the right or the left side of the hindquarters of the animal. So you have to remove that by traegering. You also have to remove certain blood vessels which are filled with blood and cannot be eaten. So between the blood vessels and the sciatic nerve and the forbidden fats, we generally sell the hind part of the animal to the non-Jews because they're allowed to eat the whole thing. So we generally don't even bother with this stuff. We just sell the second half of the animal. But in large Jewish, dense Jewish populations, where it's worthwhile, we actually will traber the back part of the animal and thus make it kosher for kosher consumption. In order to know how to traber an animal, you really got to know your stuff. You've really got to know your way through the hindquarters of the animal, and needs to be done through an expert Jew who's God-fearing. Very, very important to be God-fearing, because if he's not God-fearing, he'll be like, what's the big deal, right? and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he needs to have smicha to be certified for this process. Next concept is neta ravoi. This one moved from the animal kingdom to the vegetable kingdom. It's the law of the 4th year. But before I do the 4th year, I'm going to go into the Orlah, and then Orlah is the first 3 years of a tree's life, and then we'll do the 4th year because it's a little bit out of order. So what's the concept? The concept is as follows. It says in the Torah, in Leviticus 19:23, when you come to the land and you plant fruit-bearing trees, you will observe the Orlah. I'm going to translate that in a moment. You shall allow the early stages, the first 3 years of the fruit's life, to make sure that you don't eat it for the first 3 years of its life. It's called Orlah. Now, it's interesting. The word Orlah is the same word that we use with the context of the bris of an 8-day-old baby. We remove the Orlah, which is the foreskin. The foreskin is called an Orlah. But also when it comes to fruit-bearing trees, the first 3 years of the tree is prohibited to eat the fruit. What does this mean? The Torah prohibits us from eating the fruits of a tree that grow in the land of Israel for the first 3 years of its life, whether if it's belonging to a Gentile or if it belongs to a Jew. The prohibition of eating Orlah is not only on the eating of the Orlah, it also the first three years of the fruit, but also it is a prohibition against enjoying or benefiting from the fruits of Orlah. You're not allowed to benefit, just like chametz and Pesach, just like meat and milk cannot be benefited from together. It is also in addition to what's explicit in the Torah, in the written Torah, there is a tradition dating back from Moses on Mount Sinai, what we call halacha l'Moshe miSinai. We call it the oral tradition, the received oral Torah. So there's the written Torah, and then there's the received oral Torah, which is received from Moses on Mount Sinai. That not only are the fruits of the land of Israel subject to the law of Orlah, the first 3 years of banning the fruit, but also in the diaspora as well, you're not allowed to eat the first 3 years of the fruit, whether it belongs to a Jew or a Gentile, except that the fruits of the land of Israel, the fruits of the diaspora, when we do not know the status of the fruit, you're allowed to eat it. You can assume that it is not within the first 3 years of the tree's life. But when it comes to the land of Israel, in the case of a doubt, when you don't know the status of a certain fruit, you cannot assume leniency. In the land of Israel, you have to assume strictness. In other words, it is prohibited until proven allowable. Again, prohibited until proven allowable. So in the land of in the diaspora, the first 3, when you find the fruit in Publix, you can safely assume that it's a permissible fruit. It's after the first 3 years of the fruit, unless you know otherwise. But in Israel, every time you meet a fruit, it needs to be certified that this is not from Orlah, which is also why when you get exported products from Israel, you also want to make sure there's a lot of certifications that come out of the land of Israel. You need to make sure that the fruit has had its priestly gifts separated, the tithes have been separated. We spoke about that in a previous class. And you also have to make sure that it is not within the first 3 years of the fruit's life. Right? And that's why it's certified by a kosher certification agency that says this is not Orlah. That's the law of Orlah. But in addition to the first 3 years, there's another law in the Torah, another concept relating to fruits, and that is the 4th year. It says in the Torah now, again, in the written Torah, Leviticus 19:24, which is the very next verse in the Torah after the law of Orlah. It says in the 4th year, the fruit will be holy to Hashem. Which means after waiting 3 years for the first 3 years of the fruits, we have been commanded to observe a 4th year of holiness for the fruit and to eat it. And what that means is, what does it mean to eat it in holiness? It means to only eat it in Jerusalem in a state of purity. You are able to redeem the fruit of the 4th year for an amount of money, and then bring that money to Jerusalem. So you don't have to literally take a plane to Jerusalem with all the fruits that grew in the 4th year and eat them in Jerusalem. You can sell them and use that money to take with you to Jerusalem, and then that money, whatever it buys in Jerusalem, is the exchange of the holiness of the 4th year fruits. So when you use that money to buy to buy food in Jerusalem, you eat it. In Jerusalem, that would be the fulfillment of the holiness of the 4th year. Today, when we are assumed to be in a status of impurity, we come in contact with the dead people. When we say impurity, we mean coming in contact with dead people. There's certain bodily emissions that make us impure. This is beyond the laws of kosher, by the way. This is the law of purity and impurity in general. For example, just to give you some context, today you can come to shul whenever you want, but in temple times you could not walk into the temple in Jerusalem if you were in a state of impurity. For example, if you came in contact with a dead person, you went to a cemetery, you had a certain bodily emission, women in certain states of menstruation. There were various stages of purity and impurity for which you need a mikveh and sometimes time delay as well to reach a state of purity. So today, when we don't have the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer that purify us from tumas mes, from the impurity of coming in contact with a dead person, we can all safely assume that we are all impure, and therefore what we do today is that we redeem these fruits with money, and this money we then destroy the money during Passover of the 4th year and Passover of the 7th year. The agricultural cycle goes in 7 years. I don't think we've learned already the law of Shemitah, the law of the sabbatical year that's coming up soon. That's going to be a very interesting one, which makes life super interesting in Israel and super courageous. If you want to know the concept of gates of trust applied, try taking 1 year off of work every 7 years in Israel. That is to put the pedal to the metal, to put the money where your mouth is, to see if you can actually live the gates of trust. That's the law of the sabbatical. But that's the 7th year. And in the Passover of the 4th and the 7th year, what we do is that we actually destroy the value of that coin, of the money, of those fruits. We literally redeem the fruits with a certain amount of money, and we'll either throw it into the Dead Sea or we'll destroy the money. So that way we're not benefiting from the prohibition of the 4th year. Of the 4th year of the fruits. So that was some concepts that we covered today. Quite a few concepts. We covered the salting of the meat, the gifts to the priests. We covered the carcass, Traegering the fruits, and when it comes to fruits of the tree, the first 3 years and the 4th year as well. These are the major concepts we discussed. Winston's questions: if a chicken meets the kosher criteria, is it okay to eat the bones? Yes. There is a method of softening the bones called presto cooking. You can eat the bones. That's fine. Winston, chelev is known as suet. Thank you. As the animal fats that the Torah prohibits. Thank you very much, Winston. That is the word I was looking for, suet. Much appreciated. Good. So there you go. By the way, when you cook a chicken, Winston, listen, when you cook a chicken, right, what's happening is that the bones are going into the meat is going into the bones, everything's going into everywhere else because of the exchange of the heat for them, right? So you are already eating the bones when you're eating the meat. Right, so of course you can eat the bones if you want to actually eat them or whatever you want to do to them. That's fine, but whatever's going into your oven is already 100% kosher after it's been a kosher animal, slaughtered in a kosher way, made sure that it wasn't sick after the slaughtering to make sure that it wasn't already dying, and you Traegered the non-kosher parts of the animal, and you salted it. Now you can eat whatever you want, okay? And you didn't eat it together with the milk. So this, my friends, today concludes the kosher crash course for today. Tomorrow morning, we will continue with the video of the Rebbe. For bringing with the Rebbe tonight at 7:30, we have a very, very powerful presentation called Journey of the Soul, Lesson 3. Tonight's topic is all about the process of dying from the perspective of the bereaved. Last week, we spoke about the process of dying from the perspective of the soul itself, the deceased. This week, we're going to be talking about from the perspective of the bereaved. We'll be talking about the Torah's brilliant approach to healing from grief and mourning through the process of the Torah's mourning, and some philosophical approaches as to how to heal, as well as some etiquette for the Shiva house. All that's happening tonight at 7:30. You can register for the class if you haven't done so already at jewishgardens.com/RSVP. That's jewishgardens.com/RSVP. The class is taking place on Zoom, but it is not an open forum class. You have to register for the class. Thank you very much, everybody. I want to thank again today's sponsor, Corina Nadel, for dedicating today's Torah study in honor of her complete and speedy recovery from her surgery today. Kreina Bas Teva Keli should be successful in the surgery, and it should go well. We're praying for you. No, we don't make a mishaberach in advance, but certainly today, the merit of today's Torah study should serve to bless you with much success in all of your endeavors. We're here for you, and looking forward to good news. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me this morning today. Have a great day. Shalom.